Welcome to the Living Legends. I am Pheroze. In this edition of the Living Legends, we speak to one of Kenya's eminent law practitioners. He has represented accused persons in Kenya, Tanzania, and the Seychelles. He's also known for his involvement in the clamor for democratic reforms in Kenya. Most recently, he was part of the Azimio la Umoja legal team when they contested the 2022 general election at the Supreme Court. Our guest is Senior Counsel and poet Pheroze Nowrojee. Pheroze, it's an extreme pleasure to have an absolute legend on our show, The Living Legends. Thank you very much for accepting to be a guest on this show.
Not at all. Thank you for having me, Pheroze. Good evening, viewers, and glad to be with you.
Good, Pheroze. Let's start off with your early life and education. Tell us more about that.
I'm born here in Nairobi and did my primary school here. My father thought that he didn't want his son continuing in a colonial setting in a colonial school, and sent me to a boarding school in India, where I did my secondary school, and then in Bombay University I did my first degree. I came back here. I was a teacher in City High School, secondary school, then went to do my law. Came back.
Oh, interesting. Initially you were a teacher,
yes,
and then the law career came later.
Yes.
Okay.
That's right.
And the law career, you went overseas as well, right?
Yes, to London. I enrolled at Lincoln's Inn, and I'm a barrister from there.
Thereafter is history. Right, let's just move a little further. We're rewinding time and going step by step. The Lorry Trials of 1953 had a big impact in you choosing law as a career. Tell us how this drove you towards a career in law.
That is true. The Lorry massacre took place in March 1953, and my father who was a lawyer, was among the defense counsel. And the trials were conducted at Githunguri. And I was waiting to go to university, and I was here, back from India, and I accompanied him to the part of the trials. And they did impact on me very significantly in two ways. I saw the defense team, particularly my father, with a commitment to being the persons who were not just representing persons who were not able to engage lawyers or have resources to pay, but who were standing between the possibility of injustice to persons who could not speak for themselves. And I thought that this was such a worthwhile thing to look to in future to do. The second thing that happened at Githunguri was I saw the accused persons. Now, these were not ordinary trials. In each of these trials, there were three major trials, and I attended only one. There were about 70 accused persons in one trial, in one room, one hall. And I studied them, I looked at them, and what I saw on their faces was two very important things. One was that in the face of colonial power, and being unarmed people with nothing in that courtroom, each of those persons charged was totally fearless there was no acknowledgement that the colonial powers could win from them of fear, of submission. And secondly, over the period of those 2-3 weeks, I saw the constancy of their courage.
Determination.
And determination. And those are the things I carried away from there. And although I became a teacher, I was waiting time. I always, from that time onwards, was very clear that that is the profession I wanted to be in.
And you must be extremely proud of your father, and you followed in his footsteps.
Yes, I was. Not only because he was a father, but because he was a very fair man. He was a sportsman. He captained the cricket, Asian cricket 11. He founded the Asian European cricket match.
Wow, interesting.
And very fair player. He also played hockey. And very fair on the field. And he was as fair in the courtroom. And
what a great man.
A great man indeed.
But you've honored his name by doing the same.
Thank you.
Now let's move ahead a little bit now. Let's take a look at some of the cases you defended. Achu Ram Kapila,
yes,
who was Mzee Jomo Kenyatta's lawyer in Kapenguria,
yes,
who was accused of foreign exchange control violations after 26 pounds
yes,
was found in his house. And what other association or what other cases did you do with Achu Kapila?
I joined Achu as a junior associate in his chambers. And the sham case that was brought against him,
26 pounds.
26 pounds, was carried on while I was in not working for him. By then I was teaching in Dar es Salaam, but I came back to defend him. There was nobody who could defend better than himself, but it's a very serious decision for any lawyer to defend himself.
To make that, yes.
And we took that decision because we really thought that that was the best lawyer in that room. And he had a precedent in that at Kapenguria, D.N. Pritt was defending Kenyatta with Achu.
Yes.
And at that time, Achu was a junior to Pritt, like I was a junior to Achu in his case. Yeah. And Pritt also, it was decided that Pritt would defend himself. And it is the mark of the ability to disassociate your personal interest from the evidence, the law, the material, and he really was a model of counsel in his own case as in other cases. And what I took away from Achu was yet another building block towards the future, and that was that Achu was already famous for having defended Kapenguria. The Kenyatta, Bildad Kagya, Acheng Oneko and others. But he had been doing that even before Kapenguria, from the time he came in from 1946 up to 52. And he was, what I took away from him was not only the excellence of him as a barrister, as a senior counsel, but when independence came, and then we turned the Kenyatta regime, went in to control the judiciary, and political opponents were brought before the courts. And the best lawyer in town was Achu, and often Achu was engaged by those political opponents. And so what Achu stood up for, freedom of the country in Kapenguria in the 50s, and in the 60s, 70s, freedom for all Kenyans through the independence of the bar.
He was never compromised.
He was never compromised.
A man of morals.
Indeed.
And principles. Fantastic. Further associations with him, like joint cases that you handled in the Seychelles, for example?
Yes, I was fortunate. Not everybody has the luck to find a brief in the Seychelles. So Achu was engaged by the person who was soon to become the president of Seychelles, Albert Rene. But his competitor, while the country was still a colony, sought to weaken his political position, that is Albert Rene's political position, by staging a bombing in a hotel and then accusing a employee of Rene. And the obvious implication was that this would have been done at Rene's instigation. Right. So it really, although it was a case against a clerical officer, it was really a case against the president-to-be. So again, watching him, these political cases carry more than simply the fate of an individual standing in the accused box in the dock. And that was what the whole of the colonial period where Achu was practicing. Many of his cases were not only for the individual, they became milestones in the struggle for independence. Because Achu had the understanding of what a political trial can do, the damage it can do, and how it can be a bulwark for freedom.
His direction benefited the whole system, the whole country.
That is correct. And by standing up for the independence of the bar and the judiciary, it stood up for all the country.
Excellent. Various detention without trial cases in Kenya that ended in acquittals. Tell us more about that.
Yes. There is no trial in a detention process. Kenyatta started it and used detention to take political opponents out of the political arena, so that he was free to do whatever he liked. And the same thing continued in Moi's case. The precedent, all that the president, through the Home Affairs Minister, would have to do would be to issue a detention order. And that detention order was sufficient to take people off, and they were sent mainly to maximum security prisons, either at Shimla Teva in Mombasa
or
committee, but not for long in committee. They were scattered, and for security reasons, Naivasha or Mombasa.
Okay.
So I did a few of them. The excesses of this system, because there was no redress. You could not come to court for an appeal. There was a detainees review tribunal. And so every 6 months or so, the detainee was informed that your case will be mentioned in the next month's time, and so on. And there were two cases that I particularly remember. In one, the the detestable system of detention was best illustrated. I turned up at Nowrojee Maximum at about 7:30 in the morning for a 9 o'clock meeting, the review. And my client was Israel Agina. Israel Agina was a close associate of Jaramogi Orengo, and he was detained purely to get Jaramogi without assistance and support. Mm-hmm. And he had been put in. I was to meet him just for half an hour before the tribunal met at 9 o'clock. So they finally brought him. I was led into the waiting room, and then they finally brought him after an hour. And he was in bad condition, both physically and in his approach. And I said, "What's the matter?" Because nobody in detention looks good, but he didn't look anywhere near ordinary bad.
Right.
And he said to me, he said, "My wife died. They didn't tell me. She was buried, they didn't tell me. And after she was buried and I could do nothing, they came and told me, your wife has died and she's been buried."
Heartbreaking.
It is heartbreaking. I went into that review in a few minutes later, and there was Hancock's, there was Solicitor General, there was police, etc. And I don't normally shout in court, but I said to them, "What sort of people are you? Yeah. What sort of things are you doing?"
And you must have been hurt to the core. By looking at his condition.
Yes.
What he told you.
And what he told me and what they'd done to him. So that this pretense that Moy kept, that I'm only following the law, was nothing. This is to hurt people in a bad way. And then to go to church on the following Sunday and have the television say the president goes to church every Sunday. And there was never any attempt to say to him, we are sorry, or this should not have happened.
No regrets.
No remorse at all. The detainee's case was Orengo, and Orengo was constantly, this was the psychological damage that they did. They would come to him every few months and say, "Just sign this paper, say you did wrong here, and you apologize to the president. He's a very good man, and he will forgive you, and you will be released from here immediately." Mm-hmm. And so they brought it and left the paper with him. And then when I came in, he showed it to me. And he was hopeful for me to say, "Yeah, that's okay, sign." And I looked at him and I read it and I saw him. And I knew him because we were in rallies and political meetings before he had been detained.
Right.
It was a case of wrong identity. And I knew that he could not, once he was released, he would not be able to live with himself for having made an acknowledgement that was sham. And I said to him, I said, "It's painful for me to say it and more for you to take it, but don't sign." And his face fell, and he felt, how could I stay another 6 months, 1 year, 2 years like that? But you have to understand how...
If you give in now, you'll give in forever.
Yes, he would regret it forever. He wouldn't be able to...
So what eventually happened? Was he finally released?
He was released after a year. And this was again Moy coming for. After they were released, every single private sector people, government people were instructed no jobs to be given to these people. So when Onyango Mek Onyango was offered a job by Newsweek, they wouldn't give him passports, they wouldn't let him accept it. That is the sort of environment. Now, in this environment, you have to learn not to treat it as a case that begins and ends in a courtroom or in a cell. And that is what Achru showed. That he learned from Prit, that Kenyatta is not in a courtroom in Kapenguria because he has done some criminal activity, but because he was politically opposing the colonial government. So that you have to be aware of the history of your country, of what is going around, and the mechanisms by which injustice takes place. And so that is what I was carrying from each of these periods.
The principles, the justice system had to be protected in any era, whether it was colonial or whether after independence.
Thank you. That is exactly right. And we have to do that even now.
Even now.
Even in the future. It's not an aspersion on anybody. It is that power works to extend itself. And the Constitution and judges work to restrain that extension.
100%. Presidential petitions. Your first one in 1992, James Orengo and Gitobo Imanyara.
There were two petitions. I filed both of those petitions. It was the first presidential petition against an incumbent president, and the principal ground in that one was that the Constitution by now have been changed, that there should be president cannot stand if he has already served 2 terms. And this was going to be Moy's 5th term.
5th term, yes.
So we brought the petition.
20 years? Yes.
We brought the petition. So the election was in December 92, and the petition was from 93 to 94, 95, etc. And we were thrown out because the court, which was Moy's court, said, no, you can count those 2 only from when the new law was passed. And so he went on.
The rest can be disregarded.
Correct. The past can. So he went on for another 10 years. But it's what was the second one came 5 years later, when I filed Kibaki's case. Kibaki then stood in 1997, and again Moy won. Again for various wrongdoings, including the printing of ballot papers in our government press in Nairobi, following the pattern of what was printed in Britain at that time. And that was important because now we were looking at a very great shift, Fayaz, in mass thinking.
Mindsets were changing.
Times were changing. And changing that people were beginning to question. It was not Moy's time of 1988 when he could order that there was a Mololongo, which was the way to count the votes.
Yes.
And then all that the district commissioner would do was to switch the figures. And unfortunately for them, Kenneth Matiba was videoing all this at Muranga.
Right.
So now things were changing. And that was thrown out because because they said we didn't go and serve the president personally with the papers.
So you lost on a technicality?
Completely. And it was not only a technicality, it was that that same court had already ruled.
Not easy to serve the president personally.
It was not possible. And there was machinery in the law to publish it in the Gazette as service.
Yes.
And then we came back into court on a presidential thing, and I was in the 2017, which was I acted for Raila with other lawyers against.
That was the first petition in 2017.
In 2000.
For representing Raila Odinga, right?
That is correct. And there we succeeded, and there were two aspects to keep in mind here. One is that it came 25 years after the first petition in 1992.
Yes.
And so it is important that if we believe in a constitutional order, we must be constant in believing in it. Over 25 years.
You can't keep shifting goalposts.
We cannot. And we must be persistent. We must be there 25 years later to bring that same thing. A doctor cannot say, I did this operation 25 years ago, now I'm not going to do it anymore.
Yes.
So the same remedies come in. And the second thing is the new constitution was in place. The judiciary had been supported to be more independent and showed themselves as independent, and we succeeded. And the next time was a few months ago when we went into the 2022.
2022. Yes.
And we put forward the grounds, etc. And there we did not succeed.
It was dismissed.
And the matter is still in public debate for different reasons again.
Right, let's move on to your association with the CIA Governor, Honorable James Orengo. Tell us more about it. A fellow political worker, worked very closely with you.
It is true. We found ourselves, as did many people, that we were moving from law into politics. And the reason for this to have happened was that first, as lawyers, we were defending Moi's political opponents or Kenyatta's political opponents.
Yes.
But when, like Achru, we were successful, then both Kenyatta and Moi turned again on the lawyers themselves. And we then began to have to defend ourselves. And so we would defend each other, and then it became clear that to change the system, we had to change the politics, and that is where we entered politics. And this was something which Councillor Dede was once asked in the independence struggle, after the independence struggle, and he was asked, when did you join Jaramogi in the struggle? And Councillor Dede said, I didn't join Jaramogi, and Jaramogi didn't join me. We found ourselves in the struggle, each other. Yes. And that was what was happening against Moi. Yeah. And so Jim and I, we
were dedicated to the same cause.
Correct.
As simple as that.
And people, yes, there was the commonality.
The commonality was there.
Of this thing there. So, and there were times when he was being charged, and when I was charged, they were there. And if I had defended Achru defended me. Yeah. When I was charged.
You were all looking out for each other.
Absolutely.
So you were the Secretary of Constitutional and Legal Affairs for Ford Kenya. Yes. That was from 1992, that was during Jaramogi Oginga Odinga's time, yes. Up till 1997. Right?
That is correct. And it is a very proud thing to be, to serve under Jaramogi. Jaramogi gave his life towards the freedom of all people in Kenya. And in 1955, 56, 57, while Kenyatta was languishing, the British colonial governments were looking for somebody to become somebody they could hand over power to, who would do what they wanted after they left. And they came to Jaramogi, who was by then in the LegCo, senior member, and said, we want you to be chief minister and take Kenya to independence. And Jaramogi said to them, no, our chosen person for chief minister will be the person you are detaining, Jomo Kenyatta. And that is the person you have to go to. And
that was very noble of him.
it is truly noble of him, and it was again constant of him. He maintained that throughout. After independence, he didn't go to Kenyatta and say, now step aside, I should be nothing. And this is why it was an honor to serve. And I represented Jaramogi in the case just before the 1992 elections, when Moi changed the nomination process so that he could surprise everybody.
So you were also part of the Social Democratic Party as a treasurer.
Yes.
And being part of the Orengo presidential campaign team in 2002?
Social Democratic Party nominated James Orengo to be the presidential candidate in the 1997 election. And as treasurer, I had to sign the nomination papers and present them. So we presented them to the then Electoral Commission, and we went forward. And the importance of that is not that we had a treasure chest, a war chest, or an organization. At that time, there were no subsidies from the government to any political party. The importance was that we said that a political party and a presidential candidate must have a national program which is for the people, and that it must be presented by committed people, not by people who are looking to occupy the position to further
their causes,
ethnic supporters, or their own bank balances, and so on.
Opportunists.
Total opportunists. And so, of course we lost, but of course we put on the map that there are people in Kenya who have not changed. Whether it is after independence or whether it is after multi-party.
We still have people of substance.
And the fight for constitution went on. So a few years later, in 2010, the new constitution came in. And that was one of the greatest achievements of the lawyers of Kenya.
Okay. So, quick one. Your books, your publications, you're an ardent writer, Station Master, A Vote for Kenya, the November 2005 referendum and Kenyan politics today, Pio Gama Pinto, Dukawala, A Kenyan Journey. And you have, you've been awarded across the globe. You have a string of awards. Okay, I'm sure there must be one or two that are very, very special to you. A quick one, as we're running out of time.
I think the special ones are, firstly, I was put on the roll of honor of the Law Society of Kenya, and later was appointed a senior counsel. And these are important because they are not honors from outside; they are your peers giving it to you.
Yes.
But from the honors from outside, there are two special things. One is the certificate of recognition of the exceptional given to me by the Maasai community, the Manyoito Pastoralist Integrated Development Organization, that's Maasai body, for the exceptional, I quote, the exceptional role played in safeguarding the rights of the Maasai people, awarded at Longonot on 8th August 2007. And the other one...
I can understand why that is so special to you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the international award that is special to me is the Bernard Simons Memorial Award in 2002-04, which was given by the International Bar Association. And this is a very well recognized award, which is very special to me, and I was awarded this in Durban in 2002.
It's fantastic, and you know, as I listened to you conducting this interview, reminds me of a song which I would like to dedicate to you, Frank Sinatra's My Way. You know, some of the lyrics, regrets I've had a few, but then again, too few to mention. I planned each charter course, each careful step along the byway, and much more than this. I did it my way. And the ending, the record shows I took the blows, but I did it my way.
Thank you.
And that is a song that represents you. I hope one day, at a certain stage of my life, I can actually sing that song with feeling, and it represents me. But it definitely represents you, and I'm dedicating it to you. Finally, you have poetry. You have a passion for this, and you won the 2001 and 2001 BBC Network Africa Poetry Competition prize winner. Tell us about your love for literature, and you can read us a poem as we close.
Thank you. I think the poetry was an extension of what we were doing in the politics of the time, and the quiet ambitions that we all hold, that we are the greatest writers around, or the greatest singers around. And a large part of my poetry is political. But many people ask me, how did you withstand the very enormous and continuous pressures for nearly 25, 30 years from the executive and in the politics? And there are many things, family, the personal things that we do in terms of music or whatever we wanted to do. But one part of it was Kenya itself. The Kenya is an astonishing environment to belong to. Yeah. And so the poem that I want to read finally is a poem to Kenya.
Yeah, we'd love to hear it.
On Kenya. The field is not the currency of our land. A fence is not a border to our eye. Hedgerows are not limits. Nothing punctuates the might of this land. Cloud, the curve of the earth, waters moving away, these mark our edges, not by enclosure, but by the freeing of spirit, setting for us the measure for our lives.
Absolutely beautiful.
Thank you.
Lovely way to end this interview.
Thank you,
Pheroze, Nowrojee, it's been an absolute pleasure. You are an absolute legend. Thank you so much for accepting this invitation to be our guest on the Living Legends.
Thank you, Pheroze. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. It's been an extreme pleasure speaking to award-winning poet and senior counsel Pheroze Nowrojee, inspired by Mzee Jomo Kenyatta's lawyer Achru Kapila, whom he later represented in court and has been part of 3 presidential election petitions and fought for the opening up of Kenya's democratic space. Thank you, senior counsel, for being with us. I am Fayaz Qureshi. Thank you for watching.